In the mid-1980s, Richthofen, along with his Project Janus board of directors, were looking to establish a new facility. In the middle of the Philippine Sea, they discovered an abandoned island called Terminus. Hoping because of its remoteness, this would be an ideal location for their new base of operations, they had a surveyor assess the site. On July the 12th, 1984, as he was carrying out his preliminary site assessment, the surveyor noted that the main structure is a fortress, reinforced concrete that was poured in 1942, and an average thickness of 3.5 feet, enough to withstand anything that Project Janus would want to place here. On the bad side, he found that the place was covered in a festering mold-like moss that smelt like ass. But given the history of the place, neither of those details were surprising. He also noted that the locks, cameras and lighting on the long-term holding cells, interrogation rooms and living quarters would need to be replaced and updated with the latest technology. And whilst there were numerous tunnels that ran throughout Terminus that could provide freedom of movement to any area of the island, there was one concern. Back in 1932 in those tunnels, there was a mining accident that killed dozens of workers, and ever since then, some weird shit had been going on down there. But ultimately, he signed off on his report, and Terminus Island was ready for Richthofen to use. To take lead of the island, he hired a scientist called Dr. Modi. Whilst Project Janus's backers wanted her to make sure the island worked on energy and weapons research, Richthofen chose her for her biological background. Modi was famous for conducting unethical human test trials. There were all kinds of dark rumours that surrounded her and the things she had done in the past. But above all, Richthofen hired Modi for one reason only: to regrow a complete and functioning human body from a single DNA sample. As she got to work, as a part of the island's tech ops team, she hired someone called Owen Guthrie. Guthrie's job was to inventory all of the island's test subjects, but as time went on and as Modi began to experiment on more and more people, the amount of subjects arriving to the island at once became crazy, and needing more people, Richthofen told a smuggler that he was working with by the name of Franco to deliver refugees to the island, which is exactly what he did. Two other smugglers that Franco was working with, who were brother and sister, went by the name of Maya and Nathan Aguinaldo. One day as Nathan was driving the boat across the Philippine Sea with some refugees in it, Franco had these refugees placed on a different boat and sent to Terminus Island. But he also betrayed Nathan, had him placed on that same boat and sent to the island as well. And when he arrived there, he was thrown into a prison cell and interrogated by Ernest Duffer, the island's interrogator. As more and more of these refugees continued to be delivered to the island, it started to overwhelm Guthrie, who was taking inventory of all of them. Even though he never really took pride in his work, why would he? To a certain extent, he knew what was going on here was wrong, but he never really thought about it. In order to make sure that everyone stuck by the code that they swore when they first started working at Terminus Island, that all of the work taking place here was to be conducted in secrecy and no one outside was to know. To make sure that everyone was at their best, Modi scheduled psych evaluations for the whole tech ops team, trying to flush out anyone that no longer believed in the program. And if she did ever catch someone, she'd make sure they were dealt with, where she'd place them in public so that everyone could see them, making an example. But this kind of fear tactic, Modi's way of trying to maintain order, started to break Owen, and so wondered if he could get reassigned, because when he first started working here, the subjects were just serial numbers with faces on them, but over time, it got to Owen, to the point where he lay awake at night, driving himself crazy over what he was participating in, thinking about who these people might have been before, and the lives they had before they were taken as refugees and sold like livestock. A couple of months later, as Owen walked by Nathan's holding cell, he couldn't help but feel sorry for him, knowing that he'd been a smuggler most of his life, probably thinking that he'd already seen the worst of what humanity had to offer, and now ending up here ruined Guthrie's day, and so he decided that he wanted to do all he could to protect him, telling Nathan not to kick up a fuss and cooperate, but he'd noticed that Modi was sniffing around. Nathan was bringing attention to himself. He wasn't cooperating, he wasn't taking his meds, he wouldn't sleep, he wouldn't eat. Owen warned him if he wasn't careful, Modi would transfer him to the amalgam program, and that'd be the end of him. But still, Nathan wouldn't listen. Deciding to put himself first, he played it safe and kept his head down, so that Modi didn't become suspicious that he wasn't a believer anymore. And after a month of trying to convince Nathan to also keep his head down, it didn't work, and he was eventually transferred to the amalgam program, where she experimented on him. But that was Guthrie's final straw. Ever since finding out what had happened to him, he couldn't sleep. The regret of not saving him was gnawing at him. So he started spending his nights searching for evidence. He hired an independent journalist to look into the work that was being done here, and the things that he found were horrifying, to the point where he was pretty sure he'd checked his entry ticket to hell. At the very least, he would surely be guilty by association. But it was what it was. The damage had already been done. Owen collected as much evidence against Modi and the experiments she had been conducting here as he could. To make sure that it wasn't found, he kept everything that he had discovered hidden inside of a shipwreck nearby, while on the wall he had post-it notes and pictures and documents of all of his discoveries. He charted down all of Modi's crimes: human trafficking, forced labour, human trials, murder. He wrote down that after this he would need witness protection for his wife and kids. He found information about a mansion site. He wondered who he should tell. Congress, the DOJ, the press. Were any of them in on this as well? He wrote down who is GK? Janus facilities, Terminus, the towers. How many others? Guthrie also found out that Richtofen and Project Janus was somehow experimenting with time travel, and the French syndicate were involved and funds were coming from Avalon. But eventually the freelance journalist that Guthrie hired was discovered by Modi and killed, leaving Guthrie to wonder if he had ID'd him and gave his name to Modi before she killed him. But with all of this evidence, Guthrie then submitted a transfer request, which was approved. He was going to make sure though he didn't leave the island empty-handed, and as soon as he was out of here, wanted Modi putting in prison and Terminus Island shut down. Maybe then he could finally sleep. However, because of Guthrie having worked here for such a long time and having been exposed to Ethereum, he had fully lost his mind. Even though Terminus Island's employees were expected to go through Ethereum exposure inoculations to make sure they didn't succumb to its side effects, Guthrie's memory had already gone to shit. One of the island's doctors told him that he should document his days to see if his memory gets better or worse, but considering he couldn't recall the basic protocol he put in place, it wasn't improving. Things were falling out of his memory like they were never there, to the point where he couldn't even remember anymore the lock code on Nathan's containment unit. He was scared that if he cracked, then people were going to get hurt, and if he slept, that he would wake up again and not know where the hell he was. Unfortunately for Guthrie though, before he got his chance to be transferred away, Modi discovered him.
It certainly has been a whirlwind of events. Tying up the loose ends Guthrie left behind was a waste of time and resources. I'll admit I was surprised how much evidence he'd gathered before he was discovered. It's my own fault for becoming so lax, yet another reminder to always remain vigilant. Thankfully, his colleagues knew of his transfer request. When I told them it had been approved, they were sad he hadn't said goodbye. Funny. Despite his best efforts to destroy my work, his very existence now supports the need for it. If he continues to endure, he might end up being the longest surviving subject in the program. I would no doubt come under some fire if anyone found out that one of our own was now being kept in a tank and fed table scraps. So I've redacted any mention of his employment here. I'm currently determining how sentient he is. Guthrie, Patient 13 hasn't spoken since the early phases of his transformation. I have him on display in a high-traffic area so he can watch his colleagues go about their day. It would be a shame if he was unaware of their presence.
After capturing Guthrie, tracking down all of the loose ends that he had left behind, she used his transfer request as an excuse as to why he was not around anymore, telling his colleagues that he had been moved away. As Modi began experimenting on Guthrie, whereas normally her patients would survive for a few days or weeks, Owen quickly became her longest surviving subject, to the point where all of the effort that he had gone to destroy Modi's work was now needed to support his very existence. Redacting any mention of his employment at Terminus Island, she had Owen placed in a tank where he was fed table scraps. As more time went on and the longer Modi experimented on him, he began to change, and he changed that much where he no longer spoke. In fact, he hadn't spoken since the early phases of his transformation. She experimented on him more and more. He grew bigger and bigger, continued to change, where he ended up looking like what they called a mucus monster that Modi officially named Patient 13. Now 10,000 times his original size and with tentacles, looking like some giant KRAKEN creature, she contained him outside on display in the bay in a high traffic area so that he could watch his colleagues go about their day-to-day life, because to her, it would be a shame if he was unaware of their presence. On February the 19th, 1991, a zombie outbreak happened on Terminus Island. The 4 Requiem characters, Weaver, Carver, Gray, Strauss, along with Raptor 1, Maya, and Dr. Peck, fight for their lives against the undead as they attempt to escape, where Patient 13 breaks free of his containment, and stalks the island, shooting a toxic gas from his tentacles at anyone that stayed in the water too long. During the zombie outbreak, Modi leaves the island on her submarine, but as Weaver and the rest of the crew want revenge for everything she's done, with the help of the island's AI network, Sam, they override Modi's submarine, bring it back to the docks, where they confront her. Strapped to the side of her sub are some Ethereum warheads that belong to Dr. Peck that she retrieved from the middle of the ocean, but all of a sudden, Patient 13 comes out of the water and drags Modi's sub down with the Ethereum warheads, causing his etheric energy to spike off the charts. Patient 13 then begins attacking the characters, using all of his abilities, slamming his tentacles on the dock, shooting gas from them, and even summoning a huge ball of energy. Eventually, he is killed and defeated, where his corpse explodes and the rest of him sinks to the bottom of the ocean.